Kia ora koutou, welcome to Public Interest. My name is Ollie Nees. This week, the government announced that it will be scrapping the fees-free scheme, which provided 1 year of free university study or 2 years of free industry training. A flagship policy of Jacinda Ardern's Labour government, the scheme was initially supposed to extend in time to offer 3 free years of study. But that extension never happened, and now it's all gone. With me to discuss the impacts of this change is President of the Tertiary Education Union, Ti Lamusse. Welcome, Ti.
Kia ora.
Now, Ti, what was your reaction this week when you heard the government would be scrapping the fees-free scheme?
Yeah, so I was pretty gutted. I'm the president of the Tertiary Education Union, President TDT, but I'm also a lecturer at Victoria University of Wellington. And so every week I have my students who I have the pleasure of teaching, who I know as a result of this decision will be $12,000 more in debt. And I think that's gutting for them. It really sucks that as a result of mismanagement of finances by this government, as a result of prioritising tax cuts for landlords and tobacco companies, this government has decided to remove funding, remove fees-free for final year students. And as a result, we're going to have a whole generation with a whole lot more debt.
So if you are in your third year this year, the change won't affect you, but I imagine there's lots of students out there who might be in their first or second year of study who have planned to get that third year free. Are they now left in the lurch by this change?
Yeah, we've heard a lot from students in this kind of situation. Students and their family members who feel like they have been left in the lurch, like they've been sold a false promise by successive governments. They've done their time, they have put in a couple of years of funding themselves through university, and then to be told, well, actually, next year it's not going to be free. And so this is going to affect tens of thousands of students who thought initially that their final year would be free, but it's no longer going to be. And so that's a lot of people with additional debt.
Do you think this change will be putting people off signing up for tertiary study?
Yeah, I think it will. And it won't just be universities, it'll be polytechs as well. I think that we will see a drop-off, particularly for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who will have to make up, we'll have to weigh up, is it worthwhile going into an extra $12,000 of debt for an education? And I think it's just wrong. I think it's deeply unfair, especially when it is public tertiary education that we're talking about. It is the ability for us all to live in a society that is better educated, that has critical thinkers, that has all the doctors and nurses and teachers that we need, because that's what tertiary education is about.
Well, let's turn to the justifications that have been given by this government for the change. In essence, the rationale is that the scheme hasn't had the effect that was intended. So a key purpose of the policy when it was first introduced under the Labour government was it was going to increase participation in tertiary study overall, but especially address some of these equity issues, so making it easier for students from disadvantaged backgrounds to get into tertiary education. But since the policy has been introduced, it hasn't exactly lifted participation overall, and at least according to reporting from the Herald, but also supported by some research from AUT, the gap between enrolments from high-income and low-income areas, students from those areas, hasn't decreased. Do you agree that the scheme hasn't succeeded in that respect?
You can't expect a scheme like this to succeed when it only applied for 1 year, right? The financial barriers to low-income students still remain, right? It partially reduced the issue, right? It's like if you're going to the doctor and you're getting a medication and you're only getting part of the medication, right? It's not going to fix the problem when the problem is a huge amount of debt required in order to attend tertiary education. So when it's held to that standard, it cannot succeed because it needs to be fully funded and fully free for all years in order to really meet the need of lower income students. When it was first introduced, it was actually happening in the context of almost historic low unemployment. And what tends to happen in the tertiary sector is during low unemployment, we see fewer student numbers. And as unemployment rises, we see more student numbers. So that was part of the context. So people were making the cost benefit analysis and thinking, especially from lower incomes, better to just go into the job market rather than
Mm,
university to begin with. So that's part of the context for in which it was occurring. Uh,
right.
and then the other side of it as well is that the opportunity cost of studying is that you're foregoing employment, right? And student allowances are set at such a low level, accessible to so few young people, so few students, that the ability to just study meaningfully, the barriers are too high for people from low incomes. So free education, when it's only limited to 1 year, is not going to fix this issue. And it needs to be part of a broader package of policies that are about encouraging people from all walks of life to be able to get a high quality education.
Mm, mm. It's interesting you bring up the fact of, or the barrier of student debt being part of the picture here, because the availability of student loans has been cited by some as a reason why the fees-free policy didn't work as intended. And what I mean by that is people have
Mm,
said, well, it didn't work because you can just get an interest-free student loan. So there's not really a financial barrier there, because if you want the money to enroll, all you have to do is apply to the government for it. But I suppose that treats debt as if it's not a problem in and of itself, right?
that's right. But it is quite a substantial problem. So, um, as people listening to this podcast, watching this will know, is that student loan repayments actually take up a massive chunk of your income.
Mm,
And New Zealand actually has one of the highest rates of repayment. Um, as a proportion of your income, and it kicks in at a really, really low rate. So well below the poverty line, people are starting to pay off their student
mm,
loan. I know that when I was a student, I was paying off my student loan, earning around $23,000 a year. And to me, that's just wrong, right? But part of all of this is that student debt creates barriers for sometimes decades for people to move on in their lives. Firstly, it
mm,
reduces your disposable income for sometimes decades. And secondly, it limits your ability to get things like um, a home loan. So it has
mm.
flow on impacts for people for decades. And this extra 12, up to $12,000 of debt that this government is putting young people, and overwhelmingly, although not
Mm.
exclusively young people, in, is going to create further barriers for those people to live fuller lives for potentially decades.
There's a hypocrisy here, isn't there, in that
Absolutely.
most of our political leaders went through tertiary study at a time when it was free, and now they're defending a system that locks young people into debt just for training to get the skills that we need as a country. I suppose pointing out hypocrisy only goes so far, but there's no harm in pointing out the hypocrisy here.
That's right. Before 1989, for the most part, tertiary education in Aotearoa was free. That means Christopher Luxon started his degree at the University of Canterbury, probably not paying any fees. Winston Peters almost certainly did not pay any fees in the 1800s when he went to university. It is a relatively new thing. It is a decision that governments have made to deprioritize education, to deprioritize critical thinking, to deprioritize training up the people we need and not burdening them with debt.
Now, overseas, we've seen some big movements pushing for student debt forgiveness. Would you like to see student loan debt in New Zealand wiped?
Yeah, of course, I would very much like to see that. I think that's about meeting the needs of the moment. We currently have a cost of living crisis. And for a lot of New Zealanders, that cost of living crisis is being made worse by the fact that they're paying 10, 12% of their fortnightly income in student loan repayments. And personally, I think that's unjust. I think that absolutely should be on the agenda.
I want to zoom out a bit to look at the bigger picture here. So, when we're talking about policies to support people through tertiary study, it's important to remind ourselves of why government does that in the first place. And you've touched on some of these reasons, T, already. And firstly, for individual students, we want to be supporting them to get the skills they need to get good quality jobs, to, follow their ambitions. But also more broadly as a society, we're wanting to connect up the extraordinary resource that is our young people with all of the social need that exists out there in the community. In other words, we want people to be doing all the things that need
Right.
to be doing. Standing back, how well is New Zealand's tertiary sector doing at the moment at meeting those two fundamental objectives?
To be perfectly frank, the tertiary education sector in New Zealand is in crisis, and it has
Mm,
been for a number of years now. The reason for that is that successive governments have chosen to underfund our polytechs and our universities and our wānanga. As a result, we have seen across the board in our polytechs and universities and wānanga, we've seen job cuts, we've seen course cuts, we've seen campuses shut down, uh, and we've seen the delivery of, for example, trades training being cut in the Wellington region where I live. Ability to to learn certain trades at the local polytech is no longer available because of decisions of government to prioritise funding for private providers over public providers. In the university space, funding has simply not kept up with inflation on a per capita, per student basis. And so we've seen
Mm.
countries overseas who are properly funding their tertiary education system thriving, while in our universities, our politics, our wānanga, we're losing jobs every single day.
We've talked before about the historical situation where tertiary education was largely free or provided at much lower cost. Back then, though, the numbers of people in universities was much lower. If we're looking to expand support for people in universities to make it free once again, does that also mean a need to restrict enrolments?
I think that we need to look at it a bit differently. So the situation with our tertiary education system is that it is on the whole underfunded. And the reason for that underfunding, given by successive governments, is just there's not enough money in the kitty. But the truth is, that is because we are undertaxing the very wealthy in this country. And if we actually
Mm.
took a very hard look at the tax being paid by the wealthy, I think we would find that we do have the capacity, we do have the resources as a society to ensure that anyone who wants to and is able to can get a high quality tertiary education, either in our polytechs or our wānanga or our universities.
Let's bring this back to the political controversy this week. So the Greens have come out and they've condemned the scrapping of the fees-free policy in very strong terms. They haven't gone quite so far as to commit to a full reinstatement. Labor's also been critical of the change, although has been more cautious than the Greens in terms of what they are saying they'll do if re-elected. Are you disappointed that we haven't yet got a commitment from the parties of the left to a full reinstatement of the fees-free policy?
Yes, I am disappointed, but I do expect that that should change. I think that parties of the left should understand that there are hundreds of thousands of students and their families who care deeply about tertiary education, who don't want to see themselves or their family members shackled with an extra $12,000 of debt. And I think that those parties will look long and hard at that situation, thinking about polytech students, thinking about university students, thinking about wānanga students, and realize that there are votes to be won, that there is great social benefit from ensuring that young people are not burdened with additional debt and that we make tertiary education as accessible as possible.
The introduction of the fees-free scheme in the first place came on the back of years-long campaigning by students and others. With that in mind, what is needed from students and other people who believe we need free fees to see a reintroduction of the scheme or something like it?
Well, I think when the powerful make bad decisions, the way the rest of us can respond is by getting organized. Because ultimately, if the powerful make decisions that we disagree with, the way we change it is by increasing the cost of them continuing to make that decision, right? And increasing that cost may mean being disruptive, may mean massive rallies, but it also may be the threat to their ability to get re-elected or to get elected in the first place. So getting organised as students, but also as President TDC of the Tertiary Education Union, I can speak confidently that I know that workers in the sector care deeply about funded and accessible tertiary education. And so as a result, that's one of the things that we are really keen on organising around as union is fighting for the future of tertiary education. And what we hope is that our community, our students, their whānau will come out and support us when we take action to support tertiary education. Fees free is part of the solution to the problems facing tertiary education. But the truth is we also need to see alongside fees free, a significant investment in tertiary education. Our polytechs are suffering. Our polytechs are being shuttered and privatised, and we desperately need more funding and prioritisation of funding for polytechs over private for-profit training organisations. We also need to see an urgent investment in our universities. They have been starved of funding for far too long. And so I really want to reiterate that this problem in tertiary education will not be solved by fees free alone. Even if we were to expand it to every year of study, which we absolutely should, there is still a question of ensuring that there is sufficient funding to meet the needs and to meet the challenges that universities, polytechs and Wānanga face.
That's all we've got time for today. Ti, thanks very much for coming on the show and best of luck with the campaign.
Thank you very much.